She didn't belong to him. That was the first thing Mina Gage told herself every morning when she walked into Dunne's building, badged through security, and rode the elevator to the 14th floor, where the air always smelled like old coffee and decisions that couldn't be appealed. 3 years of working for Cael Dunne, and she'd gotten good at the lie. The 14th floor wasn't technically the top. The top floor was a private suite with no elevator access and a staircase that required a separate key card. Dunne's actual office was on 14, which he'd chosen specifically because it wasn't where anyone expected to find the man who controlled the flow of money through half the port of Chicago. The windows faced south. The furniture was dark, functional, and expensive, only if you knew what to look for. He didn't perform wealth. He simply had it, the way a scar simply is. No announcement, no apology. Mina set his coffee on the corner of his desk 2 inches from his left hand, the way she'd done every morning since the 3rd week she worked for him. After she'd noticed, that was where his hand naturally rested when he was reading. He never thanked her for the coffee. He never had to. The coffee being there was the contract. "The Garfield Avenue numbers are wrong," she said, dropping a printed spreadsheet in front of him. She didn't sit. Sitting implied she was staying longer than necessary. Someone skimmed 4% from the transit receipts and buried it under fuel adjustments. The math works until you cross-reference it with the manifest weights, and then it doesn't. Dunne looked at the spreadsheet. His eyes moved the way they always did, not fast, not slow, just deliberate, the way a man reads when he's already decided what he believes and is only reading to confirm it. He had a scar that ran along his left jawline from his ear to the corner of his mouth, an old one, faded to silver white, and Mina had worked out exactly when he was about to say something sharp because the muscle beneath that scar tightened first. It tightened now. "Beaumont," Dunne said. It wasn't a question. That would be consistent with the pattern. Mina picked up the spreadsheet. "You'll want to handle it quietly. He's got 2 cousins still managing the Pilsen territory. I didn't ask for your operational advice." "You didn't have to." She slid the spreadsheet into the manila folder she'd prepared for exactly this conversation and set it on the corner of his desk. "The corrected figures are in the 2nd tab. The variance is flagged in red." Dunne looked at her for a moment. Not long. He never looked long, because looking long was a form of admission, and Dunne didn't admit anything he wasn't forced to. He went back to the document on his screen. "You can go," he said. She went. She had gotten good at that too, arriving, delivering, leaving. She kept herself small in his world. Not servile, but contained. She knew the difference. Servile was bowing your head. Contained was controlling how much of yourself you gave the room. Mina had learned young that when you came from nothing, the fastest way to get swallowed was to look hungry. So she looked bored, and she did the work, and she went home to her apartment in Wicker Park, with its radiator that clanked and its view of someone else's fire escape, and she told herself that what she was doing was temporary. 3 years was a long time to be temporary. On a Tuesday in October, she told him she was leaving at 5:30. She said it the way she said everything, flat, informational, requiring no response. "I have an appointment. The Garfield reconciliation is finished. The Beaumont matter has been logged separately and is on your desk under the blue tab." Dunne was standing at the window. He'd been standing there for the last 40 minutes, which meant something was wrong that he hadn't told her about yet. He turned just slightly, and the late afternoon light caught the left side of his face. The scar, the jaw, the particular set of his mouth that she had catalogued without meaning to. "Where?" he said. "Personal." That's not an answer. It doesn't have to be. She picked up her coat from the back of her chair. "Good night, Mr. Dunne." She heard the silence behind her as she walked to the elevator. She'd gotten good at reading his silences. This one had a quality she hadn't heard before. Not anger, not dismissal. Something slower and colder, the way water gets right before it turns. She didn't look back. Miles Orton had been a friend first, which was part of why she'd agreed to dinner. Mina didn't do dates. She did work and sleep, and on weekends when she could afford to feel human, a paperback and a glass of whatever was on sale at the place downstairs. But Miles had been in her graduate statistics course, back when she'd still believed she was going to finish her degree, and he was uncomplicated in a way that felt like a foreign language she'd once been fluent in. He'd chosen a place in River North, not fancy, not cheap, the kind of restaurant that had low lighting and cloth napkins and a wine list with a reasonable floor. She wore the green dress she'd bought at a consignment shop 18 months ago and hung in her closet waiting for an occasion. She let her hair down. She put on the earrings that had been her mother's, before her mother stopped being the kind of person who kept nice things. Miles brought yellow tulips, which made her laugh because they were so specifically him. Not roses, not dramatic, just cheerful and a little crooked. She put them in the water glass because the restaurant didn't have a vase and the waiter thought it was charming. They talked about old professors and a documentary he'd watched about migratory birds, and the way Chicago looked in October like it was trying to apologize for everything it was about to do to you in January. She was smiling when she reached for her wine, a real one. She could feel it in her face, the unfamiliar pull of muscles she didn't use at the office. She was telling him about the sparrow that had gotten into the building's lobby last week and absolutely refused to leave, had just sat on top of the security desk looking insulted, when Miles laughed and reached across the table and put his hand over hers, easy and warm, the way people who are not afraid of themselves touch people they like. Later, she would try to pinpoint it, the exact second the warmth went out of the room. She'd feel it like a change in pressure, subtle, the way the air shifts right before a storm. She glanced toward the window. The restaurant's front was mostly glass. The street outside was wet and dark, and people moved past in coats with their heads down. There was nothing out there but the ordinary cold of an October night. She pulled her hand back to reach for her wine glass and didn't think about it again. She noticed it on a Thursday, 11 days later. She'd been cross-referencing invoice batches from the legal firm Dunne, retained for his corporate restructuring. Legitimate work, technically, the kind that came with real billing codes and real partner signatures. She did it automatically, the way she did everything, matching line items to ledger entries with the particular attention she reserved for documents that were designed to be unread. She almost missed it. It was buried in a batch of filings on page 19 of a 40-page invoice, 5 hours of legal work, billed under a blind trust she recognized, one of Dunne's Delaware shells, the one he used when he wanted distance between himself and an outcome. The target entity was listed in the subnotes. She had to squint. The font was small and gray, almost decorative. Orton Financial Review and Asset Encumbrance. Dated 11 days ago, the day after dinner. The air in the office went very still. Mina sat with her hands flat on the desk for 30 seconds. She was good at not reacting. She'd trained herself out of reacting years ago, in a house where reacting meant you lost. She breathed in through her nose. She counted the sound of the building's ventilation. Then she started pulling records. She knew the system. She'd built parts of it. The tagging structure, the cross-reference keys, the way certain transactions got routed through holding companies that were nominally independent, but shared a postal address with an LLC she'd registered herself. At Dunne's instruction, 2 years ago, she knew where everything lived. She'd assumed that was a form of security, knowing the architecture. She hadn't considered what it would mean to find herself inside it. She found Miles's employer's financial filing, flagged for an audit that had materialized from nowhere. She found a margin call on his apartment building, one of those buildings owned by a parent company she'd categorized under Dunne's shadow portfolio last spring. She found a notation in the contractor database, service suspended, account closed, reason cited as risks assessment update. 10 days. It had taken 10 days to take apart a man's life and put the pieces somewhere he couldn't reach. Because she'd let someone touch her hand at dinner. Mina printed one page, she highlighted one line. She used the yellow highlighter she used for everything that required Dunne's attention. Routine, procedural. The same highlighter she'd used to mark the Beaumont discrepancy and the Port Authority overpayments, and every other problem she'd handed him in 3 years of working within his orbit. She walked to his office door and knocked. She didn't usually knock. She was doing it now because she needed the second it took to hear him say, "Come in," so that she could control her hands. Come in. Dunne was on the phone. He held up one finger, his standard signal, and she crossed the Persian rug and stood in front of his desk and waited. She placed the printed page at the center of his blotter. She smoothed it flat. He glanced down. His eyes found the highlighted line. For 1 second, just one, she saw it, the microscopic shift in his posture, the way his shoulder blades pulled back by a fraction of an inch, a man registering a trap. Then his face went clean and blank, the way a window goes dark when the light inside cuts off. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, and ended the call. He looked at the page for a long moment. He didn't look at her. "That's a standard asset review," he said. "We do them quarterly on any entity that." The billing date is October 14th. Mina kept her voice level. She'd decided on level. She'd decided on it in the elevator, and she was holding it the way you hold a breath in cold water. "I had dinner on October 13th. Silence. "His name is Miles Orton," she said. "He teaches statistics at DePaul. He brings tulips to dinner and watches documentaries about birds. He is not leveraged. He has no outstanding criminal exposure. There is no legitimate business reason for his name to appear in your legal filings." Dunne set the phone on the desk, very carefully, the way he set things down when he was deciding how much of himself to reveal. "He touched your hand," Dunne said. It wasn't a justification. It wasn't even an excuse. It was just a fact, delivered in a flat voice by a man who appeared to believe it was sufficient. "He touched my hand," Mina repeated, her voice dropping to something cold and precise. "And you dismantled his professional standing, called in a margin loan on his apartment, and initiated a financial audit that will follow him for years. Over dinner, over tulips. He... Don't." She cut him off, and the word came out harder than she'd planned, hard enough that Dunne actually stopped. She almost never interrupted him. "Don't tell me it was business. Don't tell me it was protective. You looked at a man you've never met, and you treated him like a line item in the wrong column, and you did it because I was happy for 3 hours in a restaurant, and that apparently requires a response." Dunne stood up slowly. He moved around the desk the way he always moved. Deliberate, unhurried, the kind of movement that had its own gravity. She held her ground. She always held her ground. It was the one thing she'd kept from her life before this building, before these ledgers, before she'd learned to make herself small enough to survive inside someone else's war. "You work for me," Dunne said. He stopped 2 feet from her. She could smell his cologne, something dark and quiet, expensive in the way that doesn't announce itself. "Your presence in that restaurant is none of your business." Her voice was quiet now, but it had an edge that she'd been sharpening for 11 days without knowing it. "I am your bookkeeper, Mr. Dunne. I keep your accounts. I clean your numbers. I have done that work correctly without complaint for 3 years. I have never asked what the shipments contain. I have never questioned the names in your contractor files. I have done my job and gone home, and what I do when I go home is the one thing in my life that belongs to me." Dunne looked at her. His jaw was tight. The scar on his cheek went white. "You don't understand what you are to this operation," he said, and his voice had dropped to something so quiet it barely existed. "What it costs when someone gets close to you. What they can use." "He teaches statistics," Mina said. "He is not a threat to your operation. You ran him before I even got home that night, and you know exactly what he is, and you still—" She stopped. She picked up her bag from the visitor chair. "You destroyed him anyway, because you could." She looked at Dunne. She made herself look directly at him, at the face she'd catalogued over 3 years. The scar, the jaw, the dark eyes that calculated the cost of everything they landed on, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Grief. Not for herself, For the version of him she'd constructed in her head, the one that was hard and ruthless but had a logic to it, a line he stayed on the right side of. He hadn't stayed on the right side. "I'm resigning," she said, "effective today." She walked to the door. She heard him move, one step, then nothing. She didn't turn around. "Mina." His voice had a quality she'd never heard in it. She paused with her hand on the doorframe, her back to him. "If you walk out, I can't." He stopped. A long pause. "There's no protection once you're outside this." "I've been outside my whole life," she said. "It's fine." She walked out. The door closed behind her, and she stood in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds with her eyes shut. Then she moved toward the elevator with her face straight and her hands loose at her sides. She got the job at a supply chain firm in the Loop. The pay was good, the work was straightforward, and nobody would ever come to her desk with a folder tabbed in red and expect her to know, without being told, that the problem inside it needed to disappear before the banks closed. She should have felt relieved. 3 weeks in, she was staying late most nights, not because the job required it, but because her apartment was so quiet it had started to feel like a verdict. She'd gotten used to the low background hum of consequence, the kind of work where the stakes were real and the numbers were never just numbers. The supply chain firm had stakes, technically. They had quarterly targets and a regional director who said bandwidth in every other sentence. It was fine. Everything was fine. She was sitting at her new desk on a Friday night when her phone buzzed with a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Miss Gage. It was a man's voice, flat, a little rough. She'd heard it before, not often, usually passing in the hallway at Dunne's building. The driver. She thought his name was Wick. "I'm sorry to call. I got your number from the HR file, which I know is..." "What happened?" she said. A pause. There was a problem with the Beaumont situation. The cousins decided to make a move. Tonight at the docks. It went wrong. Mina was already reaching for her coat. "How bad?" she said. "He took a hit. He's at the Dammon Avenue safe house. He won't let the doctor touch him. Wick paused again. "He's not doing well, Miss Gage, and I don't know who else to call. He told me specifically not to contact you. I want you to know that." "How long ago?" "About 2 hours." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She ended the call before he could say anything else. She stood in the lobby of the supply chain firm for a moment, her coat half on, looking at the glass doors and the October street beyond them. She thought about the HR director's beige office and the word bandwidth, and the way her apartment sounded at night, like a room someone had just left. She thought about Miles Orton. She'd called him once, 3 weeks ago, to apologize for whatever had happened to his finances. She hadn't known what to say, so she'd said she was sorry and that she hoped things worked out, and that she knew it didn't make sense from where he was standing. He'd been quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're apologizing for your boss." And he said, "Okay, I kind of figured." He'd sounded tired but not destroyed, which was something. It was something she'd held on to. She went through the glass doors. The safe house was a second-floor apartment above a laundromat on Dammon. Wick was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He looked like he'd been in a car accident and then walked away from it, which was probably close to accurate. He led her up without speaking. The apartment smelled like mildew and gun oil and, underneath it, fresh blood. Dunne was in a chair in the back room, not on the floor, not unconscious, which she counted as good news. He was stripped to the waist. The wound was on his right side, below his ribs, a through and through that had missed the critical architecture, but was still doing serious damage to everything in the vicinity. He'd wrapped it himself with what looked like an undershirt, which was thoroughly soaked through. His color was bad. His hands were flat on the chair arms in a way that suggested he was using them to hold himself in place. He opened his eyes when she came in. For a moment, he just looked at her. The calculation she'd seen in his face every day for 3 years wasn't there. What was there was something older and less defended, the look of a man who has stopped managing the room because he doesn't have the energy left to do it. Wick, he said. His voice was rough at the edges. He called me on his own, Mina said. Don't punish him for it. She crossed the room and opened the bag she'd grabbed from the first-floor laundromat, which had a vending machine with a basic first aid kit she'd cleaned out. She pulled on the gloves. She crouched in front of him and began removing his field dressing, which was impressive in a catastrophic sort of way. You should have let the doctor. The doctor talks, Dunne said. So does a dead Syndicate head. She pressed a gauze pad to the wound. His jaw tightened, but he didn't make a sound. She worked in silence for a moment, cleaning it, assessing the depth. It needed stitches it wasn't going to get tonight, but it wasn't going to kill him if she kept it clean and closed. She worked quickly, the way she'd learned to work, without wasting motion. Why are you here? He said. Because you're bleeding in a safe house, and your driver is better at asking for help than you are. That stopped, breathed. I told him not to call you. I know. She taped a compression bandage in place and sat back on her heels. She looked up at him. From this angle, with the harsh light from the bare bulb overhead, he looked like something that had been assembled under pressure. Nothing soft, nothing accidental. Every line of him a consequence of something that had happened before she knew him. You also destroyed a man's career and housing because he bought me dinner. We've established that your judgment isn't perfect. Dunne looked at her for a long moment. His hands were still on the chair arms, but they'd stopped being quite so deliberate about it. Miles Orton, he said. Yes. He's not. He's recovering, no thanks to you. She stood, peeling off the gloves. I called him. I apologized on your behalf, which you should know, because I don't do that for anyone. She dropped the gloves in the bag. I told him there'd been a clerical error in a filing that had incorrectly flagged his name. He's not going to come after you. Dunne looked at the window, a long, flat look at nothing. Why? He said. Because he's not that kind of person, and because someone should fix what you break, and you're not capable of it. She pulled a chair over and sat down in front of him, not the way she sat in meetings, not contained, not managed, just sitting, her coat still on, her bag on the floor, a woman in a room with someone who was still bleeding through new bandages and refusing to admit it. You have to send money, she said, anonymously, enough to cover the audit costs and the lease penalties and whatever he lost on the margin call. It needs to go through a clean channel. I know how to move money, Dunne said. Then do it, she met his eyes, as a condition. Of what? She watched him. The question hung in the air between them, and she let it hang there, because some things shouldn't be rushed into words. Of whatever happens next, she said. Dunne was quiet for a long time. Outside, the laundromat's ventilation unit hummed and kicked and hummed again. Somewhere below them, a dryer tumbled steadily against its drum. I don't know how to, he stopped. I know. You walked out. I know that too. I'm not going to promise something I can't keep. The muscle below his scar moved. I have spent my entire adult life treating everything as a ledger. Things owed, things owing. I don't know how to be something else. I'm not asking you to be something else, Mina said. I'm asking you to add a column you've been leaving out. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees. You understand ledgers? Fine, then understand this. What you did to Miles Orton went in the wrong column. You put it under asset protection, and it belongs under liability. It cost you your only bookkeeper and 3 weeks of operational stability, and whatever you owe Wick for tonight. And all of it was a bad investment, made for a reason you haven't been willing to write down. Dunne looked at her. Something moved in his face that she didn't have a name for yet. I saw you through the window, he said. At the restaurant, you were laughing. I know. She'd figured it out eventually, the feeling of pressure that night, the sense of something watching from outside the warm room. I felt it. You didn't say anything. What would I have said? He didn't answer that. She hadn't expected him to. Write it down, she said quietly. Whatever it costs to fix what you did to him, write it down, pay it, close the account, and then we can talk about what the next column looks like. Dunne looked at his hands on the chair arms. The knuckles on his right hand were split. She'd noticed earlier, hadn't asked. The Beaumont cousins, probably. He looked like a man who had won a fight badly and wasn't sure anymore what winning felt like. "I need someone to manage the Garfield reconciliation," he said finally. "Beaumont's replacements are going to try the same thing. The transit receipts will be manipulated inside a week." "I know." "The supply chain firm is fine," she held his gaze. "The supply chain firm is very fine. It's fine every single day in a way that makes me want to put my head through the window." His mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the suggestion of one, the ghost of a thing she'd only seen twice in 3 years, and both times she'd catalogued it the way she catalogued everything, without meaning to, without knowing why she bothered. "I'm not coming back for the same salary," she said. "I didn't think you were. And I'm not your bookkeeper." She said it carefully, precisely, making sure the words were in the right order. "I am the person who keeps your books. That's different. That means I have a seat at the table when decisions get made that show up in the numbers later." Dunne regarded her for a moment. "That's a significant ask," he said. "You've been paying me to think inside boxes I could see over," she said. "You know what I found in your legal filings. You know how fast I found it. You know what I did with it after." She sat back. "The choice is yours, but I'd make it before you lose enough blood to make it badly." The dryer below them tumbled. The ventilation hummed. "Deal," Dunne said. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't soft. It was two people in a badly lit room above a laundromat arriving at a figure they could both live with, which was, for them, the most intimate thing either of them knew how to do. Mina reached into her bag and pulled out the secondary bandage roll she'd grabbed from the vending machine. "Give me your hand," she said, "the knuckles." He held out his right hand. She wrapped it with the same focus she brought to everything, steady, without waste, each pass of the bandage exactly where it needed to be. His hand was twice the size of hers. It had scars that predated anything she'd ever known about him. "The Garfield file," she said while she worked, "the second quarter variance. I found something else in it that I didn't put in the folder." "I know," he said. "You know?" "You flagged everything in red except one line. I looked for the one you didn't flag." He watched her hands. "You do that every time. You've been doing it for 3 years. You leave one thing just out of sight and wait to see if I'll find it myself." She didn't answer. She finished the wrapping and tied it off. She held his hand for one more second than was necessary, not by accident, and felt his fingers close around hers. Not tight, not dramatic. Just there. A pressure that knew its own weight. "The line you left out," he said. "Tell me what you found and I'll tell you if you're right," she said. He told her he was right. That was how it started, not with a confession, not with a burning building, not with anyone declaring ownership of anyone else. It started with a ledger entry neither of them had been willing to put in the correct column, finally finding its way there, and both of them deciding separately and at the same time that the math was worth doing honestly. Mina Gage did not belong to Cael Dunne. She never really had. What she was the only person in his world who knew where every number lived and what it meant and what it cost when someone moved one without asking, and she had chosen, with her eyes open and her coat still on in a mildew-smelling room above a laundromat, to keep doing that work, on her terms, with a seat at the table. He would make the Miles Orton payment. She would check the receipt. That was the deal, and in their world, a deal written clearly enough was its own kind of contract, the most honest thing two people who didn't trust easily could give each other. The dryer below kept tumbling. Somewhere across the city, the port was waking up for the overnight shift, and the numbers were already waiting to be read. She stayed.